Hey everyone, today I'm going to be recording a video about how to install Yunohost onto a Raspberry Pi. Right now there's some sawing happening in the background, but I think it's not getting picked up too much, so I'm just going to go for it. So what we see here on the right is the install page for Yunohost. Similar to the page if you watched the earlier video I made about how to install Yunohost on a DigitalOcean droplet. But this time, instead of clicking remote server, we're going to click Raspberry Pi. And yeah, Yunohost has pretty nice instructions. Getting your supplies together is half the battle. We need to make sure we have the Pi, a power supply with the right cable for the Pi, a micro SD card with at least 16 gigabytes capacity. We'll get to the ISP thing later. It's a bit tricky to check what your internet connection is and if you have the right ports open, that you could have a home server wherever you live. But you can always just install on the Pi and test it out locally and then decide if your internet connection is actually good enough for having a server on it. We need an Ethernet cable to connect to the router. And lastly, the computer to read this guide, which obviously we have. And then the longest running step is you need to download the image, which is basically what we're going to put on the SD card and is the operating system containing Yunohost already on it. Unless you have a Raspberry Pi 1 or 2, you're probably going to want the 64-bit operating system for the 3, 4, or 0. So yeah, you just click download. That's the first step. And as you can see, it's a pretty large file. We have a pretty slow internet connection here, so I'm going to pause this and wait for that to download and then continue. So yesterday, the sawing actually got more intense, so I decided that I would just pause, and now I'm continuing the next day. So I think the last step was that we had downloaded the Yunohost image, and we also want to make sure to download this program called Etcher. So if you go to balena.io/Etcher, and then you go down to download Etcher, and you can download for your particular operating system. And Etcher is a program that is going to let us flash an image to an SD card. And the SD card is where the operating system of the Pi is located, as well as the storage that we'll be using, although you could also add an additional external storage, like a USB thing, if you wanted more storage. But yeah, this is important to note that the Pi itself, you can just switch in different SD cards, so it's relatively cheap to get new SD cards, and if you want to have multiple projects or something, or try something out, you can always just flash a new image to a new SD card and put it in the Pi, and that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to pause again now. Once you've got Etcher downloaded and you've got the Yunohost disk image downloaded, then we'll use Etcher to flash the image to the SD card. I'm trying a new OBS thing here, but hopefully you can see both me and this image that shows my micro SD card with 32 gigabytes of space, as well as the USB SD card reader that I'm using that has a slot for a micro SD card as well as a regular SD card. I just wanted to briefly show what both of these things look like, and if your computer already has an SD card reading slot, then you won't need one of these USB SD card readers, but you still may need an SD card adapter that goes from the micro to the regular size. Okay, so when you open Etcher, it should look something like this. It's relatively straightforward. In the first thing on the far left, you click Flash from File, and you're not going to be able to see the window where I'm selecting the file, but then you click on your file, which should be in your downloads folder that has a name, probably like Yunohost-bullseye-11.10.0.10-rpi-stable.image.zip. It's fine that it's still a zip. Etcher can handle that. So you can see here it's automatically understood that it's an image and it's going to unzip it from zip format. And then you're going to select the target, and here I'm selecting media not plants boot RFS. It has this name because my SD card already had some Pi stuff on it. I mean, you want to double check that the size is correct and the location, this /dev/mmcblk0 could be a little bit different depending on what operating system you're on and what SD card reader you're using. But if you see that the size is the same as your SD card size, it's probably your SD card. But be careful, don't overwrite something you don't mean to write, because when you overwrite with Etcher, it will completely overwrite whatever is on there. And also make sure you don't have anything on your SD card files or stuff that you want to keep, because yeah, we're going to completely overwrite it when we do this. And finally we click select, and then we click flash. May have to enter your password, which I will do while not recording. And yeah, then you just wait until it finishes flashing. And here I'll just quickly show what it looks like while it's flashing. It can take a bit of time. Mine took about 5 minutes.
Okay, cable management is always a bit of a mess, but I wanted to try to walk you through the different parts we need in order to get set up. So the main thing we need is a Raspberry Pi. Here, maybe you can see it says it's a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B, but also a Raspberry Pi 3 is fine, or if you look on the Yunohost website, also older ones are fine. Some of them require some extra configuration steps, but the guide, what I'm talking about right now, will work equally well for a 3 or a 4, I believe. And then this is slightly optional, but this is a screen and this is a keyboard. And there is a way to make this work without a screen and a keyboard, but I find when working with a Pi, it's helpful to have a screen and keyboard just as a sort of fallback for when things don't go as expected. Often the screen can help you see what's going on. But technically, all you really need is the SD card, which we already talked about, the Pi, and an Ethernet cable. And this is sort of like a standard old school cable that is still used today. And this cable even looks like it's really old. And you just click it into the Ethernet port there, and then this cable goes up to the router. And it's probably going to be a bit difficult to see here because there's a bunch of other things plugged into this router. But where you can see those kind of 4 yellow slots, any of them is fine. Just plug it into the Ethernet along with anything else that would be going into it. And yeah, and then if you don't have a screen and a keyboard, after you boot up, you need to make sure that your laptop is also connected to the same Wi-Fi network that the Wi-Fi network broadcast by the router, or also connected via an Ethernet cable to the same router. And then you just need to make sure you have a power supply. So this is slightly different for the Pi 3 and 4, I believe. But then the power supply here is just going to this USB. And in my particular case with the screen, this is a power supply for the screen. And this keyboard is plugged into the Pi via USB. But it's also worth noting that this screen looks special because it's like a small one. But really any HDMI screen will work. Something more standard like a monitor, as long just have it plugged in and make sure that HDMI is connected to the HDMI port on the Pi, which is mini on this one. I think for Pi's 3 it's not mini. And then, so that's pretty much the parts. Yeah, don't if you have a little screen, that's kind of useful for debugging a Pi and bringing it around, but like most screens work fine. Usually they work out of the box. Sometimes no, but often yes. And then you just plug in the power and hope for the best. So we see this red and green light, that's a good sign. And then over here, the screen starts to go. Hopefully soon. Yeah, we see these raspberries popping up, telling us that something is happening. Log messages as this thing boots. The red light will indicate power, and green light indicates, I believe, that software is operating properly. And eventually we get here, and I'm going to pause and come back to this. It's asking for the Yunohost login and telling us that we're in Debian, which is the base operating system that Yunohost is based off of.
Once again, I have a little issues with background noise, but I'm just going to go with it for now and maybe try to figure out some other way to record with less background noise later. So before we were looking at the screen and we were seeing Yunohost login, and then now here back on my laptop in the browser, I'm navigated to the URL yunohost.local. This is a special local domain that is broadcast by the Pi when it boots up, so it's not accessible yet through the public internet, but as long as my laptop and the Pi are connected to the same local network, which they are because the Pi is connected via an Ethernet cable to the router and I'm connected to the same Wi-Fi that the router is on, or if my laptop was connected to the router via an Ethernet cable, that would also work. Then I can go to yunohost.local and I should see this. Or if I don't see this, I'll see a warning sign that says security risk because of the SSL cert, and just click advanced and then click continue, because you know that this is a URL that you created, so you're not worried about hacking yourself. And you get to the screen saying that Yunohost has been successfully installed, and then you can click begin. And then you have an option whether to use your own domain or one provided by Yunohost. It's possible to use your own domain, but it's easier to use one provided by Yunohost. So for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll do that. It's already pre-configured, and in another video at some point, I'll show how to set a custom domain and what DNS configuration you need to do for that. And you can choose whatever name you want. I'm choosing solipi, .nohost.me, and then you click next. And then we enter a password here, which I'll do off the recording shortly. Then once you've entered your password, click next. You're now about to launch the post-installation process. It may take a few minutes. Okay. And I also just wanted to note here that the way we configured this by going to yunohost.local should work equally well even if we didn't have a screen and keyboard. So it would be the same steps. You don't need to wait to see that message on the screen. You could just boot up your Pi with the Ethernet cable connected to the router. Just wait 5 minutes or something, or even less, but wait some period of time, and then check the yunohost.local domain, and eventually it should show up. It's just nice to have the screen in case something was weird. Then you can see that it didn't make it to that Yunohost login command. And it also could come in handy in the future if for some reason you ever can't access the web interface, then you can use the screen and the keyboard to debug what's happening. But yeah, I'll pause the recording for now. The post install is running. It can take some time. This Pac-Man thing will go for a while, and eventually it will reach a success thing. Or if after a really long period of time it doesn't, you can refresh the page, and sometimes it did succeed, but it just didn't connect. It didn't update the page properly. But normally, yeah, you should wait a while and see that it gets to a success state. And eventually you should reach this installation complete screen. And then you can just type your password again. Let's see, just copying and pasting it in this time. Click login, and you've made it to Yunohost. You should see in the bottom right, powered by Yunohost, whatever version you're on. And the next step here really is to run the diagnosis, but we'll probably go through that in a different video. And as it says here, the diagnosis feature will attempt to identify common issues, make sure everything runs smoothly. Please do not panic if you see a bunch of errors right after setting up your server. It is precisely meant to help you identify issues and guide you to fix them. So this is to say we've made it to the main Yunohost thing. Now we can access Yunohost through yunohost.local. We don't really need the screen and the keyboard. And in the next videos, we'll go over going through the initial diagnosis and eventually how to install applications and do some other system maintenance and other things. But that's it for getting set up. Until next time.